My my God, why have you forsaken me? Why? Why does it feel like you're not there? Where are you? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? Those words are an example and an invitation to honesty before God, to trust, and they tell us what God is like. God, where are you? I have to admit, seems like the words of this psalm could have come out of my mouth sometimes. I hear them, I feel them, and they draw me in with their rawness and their honesty. And I think at some point in every person's life, there comes a time when we inwardly groan in despair, when we utter that cry, God, where are you? God, are you there? God, save me. Or we literally cry out in brokenness because we feel so abandoned, so alone, and so helpless. My God, why have you forsaken me? To get that question, God, where are you? Why does it feel like your phone is out of service when I try to get a hold of you? Pick up. I can't deal with that radio silence. Maybe that radio silence is something we've all experienced when we've reached out. Maybe. You know what I mean by radio silence? It's when you send an email to a whole group of people with something important to you and you don't get any replies. It's when you're in a group, maybe a small group or a study, and you open up, you take a step in vulnerability, you share something painful and personal, and the group just moves on to the next question. Next. It's when you pray to God, you cry out over and over again, you pour yourself out wanting something, anything, and you get what seems is only loud silence, like you have been forsaken. God, why have you forsaken me? I want to make something clear. You don't have to feel that way the same way the psalmist does to learn from this psalm. You don't have to be struggling or angry with God to hear this. But there is something in this for everyone. And I just ask that if you are not struggling, make space for those who are without judgment. And those of you who really are here with the psalmist, those words could be your words. Make room for those who are not struggling. We're all at different places in our journey. As we struggle with these raw words today, I want to tell you where we're going to go with this. First, Psalm 22 is an invitation to honesty with God. Second, Psalm 22 encourages us and invites us to trust God. And third, Psalm 22 tells us what God is like. So no matter where you are at, I'm inviting you to honestly reflect about your relationship with God and where your faith is today. The first point, the psalm is an invitation to honesty before God. I've been one to utter a similar cry to the psalmist. I've been one also who feels close to God. I've been both. But I want to tell you about something that happened to me that was fertile ground and an invitation for me to press into God and deepen my faith by asking difficult questions. About a year ago, a close friend of mine got cancer, and he was still pretty young, relatively speaking. He was healthy, lived a clean lifestyle on a farm, yet he got lung cancer. His name was Dave. Dave was married and had 3 kids that were the same age as my kids. And this evil thing called cancer just hit him hard in the lungs. And it seemed like one day he was fine and then he couldn't do anything because he couldn't breathe properly. He had no energy and he couldn't take care of the farm anymore. Dave lived in Edmonton, so we decided to try and stay connected. And the goal was to talk about stuff like this every day, to walk with him through this journey. So we decided to FaceTime at 3 o'clock every day. We called it our 3 o'clocks. So we tried to do that. And over the days and weeks, I would see him in different states of fighting this disease and progressing through it. I saw him progressing from just being a little bit short of breath, where it didn't really bother him that much, where he could hardly notice, to being on constant oxygen more and more. And then losing weight till he was just a shell, thinner and thinner. At those 3 o'clocks, we talked about a lot of things: faith and life, hope and death, family and friendships, but what's important in life. You know, Dave was a deeply spiritual man who had a rich and deep prayer life and followed Jesus. Even when he was in the hospital, he was telling me that he was looking forward to the journey and discovering what God had for him there in the palliative care ward. Who is he there to help? Who is he there to touch? But this whole time we prayed, and I prayed, and his family prayed. We prayed for understanding. We prayed for his healing. We prayed for comfort. Both of us, his family and his friends. And we didn't get the response we so desired. He wasn't healed. He didn't get an audible word from God. I didn't get an audible response. I felt like nobody was listening. It was like radio silence. It was disappointing. My head did say this, but my head said, everything's okay, but my heart said this: God, why have you forsaken Dave? Why have you forsaken us? Where were you when we needed you? Have you been there? Disappointed, doubting, confused maybe. Maybe this COVID situation has brought you there. Maybe you've lost someone you love. Maybe you're just struggling with your faith. God, where are you? I can almost feel the intensity of the psalmist's cry. God, why have you forsaken me? It's a cry of desperation, probably through tears, a cry of disappointment. He cries this out, he yells it out, too lost to care who's listening. And all those things in life that we can relate to, that we want to touch from God in, or a word or healing, or we are pressed in and surrounded by enemies. He called out to God, and he was met with silence. God, are you there? Listen to how he continues to pour himself out. In verse 2, it says, every day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. Have you ever called out to God like that, pouring yourself out and feeling like God isn't listening? The psalmist did. He continues, every night I lift my voice, but I find no relief. It's on his mind all the time. His need, his situation is precarious and dangerous and feels like it's going to devour him, like he's going to lose it and lose the will to keep going. These are the pits of despair. It's like praying for a friend and feeling that the prayers are ignored. It's like wanting a touch from God to feel his presence and begging for it and getting nothing. It's like the seeds of doubt growing in your mind. The psalmist notes that in the past, it seems like God had more favor on others than he had on him. He says some things that he knows to be true about his ancestors, about others receiving answers to prayer. Yet, it doesn't help him. He continues in verse 6. He continues in his despair. I am a worm and not a man. I am scorned and despised by all. See, there's a feeling that there must be something wrong with him, that he is being rejected and that he is not worthy. There must be some reason for God's silence. He's really troubled. And then he notes that as he prays, as he digs in, as he longs for God to touch him, for his presence, people are mocking him. This is what it says, verse 7 and 8. Everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer and shake their heads, saying, is this the one who relies on the Lord? Then let the Lord save him. If the Lord loves him so much, let the Lord rescue him. It's like a whispering when he walks by. He sees people put their heads together and murmur, hey, that's the guy who prays and thinks God is going to answer. What a fool. This rawness, this honesty is an invitation for us to be honest before God. Does that feel uncomfortable? I know it feels kind of like being disrespectful or a bit like biting the hand that feeds you. I see what's going on here in this psalm and many, many others. He's always honest, but is it really okay to pray this way with our heart? Can we say these things and really, really mean them? Is God okay with that? Or should we tread carefully? Be really careful and just kind of gently tell God the truth about where we're at. God, I'm kind of disappointed, just a little bit. I don't want to hurt your feelings or anything. Yet we are invited to be honest before God. There's a curious relationship between this psalm and Jesus, between the first words of this psalm and Jesus' crucifixion. Did you know that Jesus uttered some of these exact words as he hung on the cross, as he was tortured, suffering, and dying? Did you know that Jesus was radically honest before God? We turn to Matthew chapter 27, verse 46, and Jesus cries out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? The exact words of Psalm 22:1. God, are you there? Now, doesn't that seem strange to you? We have the second person of the Trinity, fully human and fully divine, crying out, feeling abandoned. How could this be so? There are different ways of looking at the words that Jesus spoke and why he said them, and I don't think they exclude each other. One way is looking at Psalm 22 as a prophetic expectation of the Messiah, the suffering servant, Jesus, foretelling that this would happen to Jesus. And I can see why. Sections of Psalm 22 dramatically portray what happened to Jesus hundreds and hundreds of years before he came. Like verse 14, his life is being poured out like waters. And we know what happened when Jesus was pierced. Water-like fluid came out. Verse 16, his hands and feet being pierced. Verse 17, none of his bones being broken. Verse 18, which talks about his clothes being divided up. Others say that Jesus knew Psalm 22 as a suffering servant psalm and deliberately quoted it at this time to show who he truly was. So that the Jews at the time who knew the scriptures would see that, yes, this was the suffering servant. This is the Messiah. But it could also be that Jesus said this because that is exactly how he felt at the moment, abandoned by God and forsaken. And I honestly think it's all three of these things. I think there is a prophetic. I think Jesus is signaling who he is. And I think this reflects how Jesus felt at the time. My God, why have you forsaken me? It was at that moment that his intimate relationship with the Trinity, with the Father and the Holy Spirit, was severed in some way that we can't understand. But we do understand, what we do understand is that Jesus felt forsaken, abandoned by God. And he expressed it like the psalmist did, with pain and intensity and honesty. Do you feel this way? Ever? Despite your faith, despite past experiences, despite feeling too close to God at other points in your life, do the whispers of doubt creep in? Do the murmurings of the crowd follow you? Do you ever wonder, along with David and Jesus, and I guess along with me, God, why have you forsaken me? God, where are you? God, why, when I cry out, am I greeted by radio silence? It can be disappointing and discouraging. Jesus and the psalmists model honesty before God, and we are invited into honesty. More than that, we must be honest before God. It's a crucial step in our faith journey. The second point is that Psalm 22 encourages and invites us to trust God. I think there's something about honesty in relationships that is obvious, but maybe overlooked. Honesty develops and leads to trust. Honesty in a relationship is a key to building strength in a relationship. And I think it's not different for us. Honesty with God is a key to developing trust with God. When we are honest with God, we learn to trust. This is the pattern we see with the Psalms and with Jesus. They always respond with trust after crying out, after expressing their despair. The psalmist cries out, but interestingly, after he cries out, he is moved. Something changes inside him. There is some deep, deep shift. He affirms and reestablishes and reminds himself why he trusts God. In verse 9 and 10, it says, "Yet you brought me safely from my mother's womb and led me to trust you at my mother's breast. I was thrust into your arms at my birth. You have been my God from the moment I was born." You are their God. It's a promise. And he trusts God because he has been revealed to be trustworthy to his ancestors, Abraham and Moses, to Israel and to him. And then he moves to praise for who God is. Jesus cries out, but he also responds with trust. Jesus felt forsaken, abandoned, alone. This God-man, the Messiah, person of the Trinity, asks, "God, are you there?" Even in that moment of despair, doubt, forsakenness, and abandonment, he turns to trust. The gospel, according to Luke, doesn't give us exactly the same snapshot of the crucifixion, but it adds a very helpful perspective. You know how Jesus responded in his moment of despair? With trust, with complete trust. This is Luke 23, verse 46. Then Jesus shouted, "Father, I entrust my spirit into your hands." And with these words, he breathed his last. Even in the moment of his feeling forsaken, he trusts. Despite the feeling of forsakenness, or dare I say, because of it, trust is needed, trust is realized, trust is demonstrated. Faith in this journey that we're on isn't about certainty and having all the right answers, all of your theological ducks in a row, all your T's crossed and all your I's dotted. Faith in this journey is about trust in the face of uncertainty. Faith in this journey are about trust, which grows out of being alone. It is trust in the goodness of God. If we go back just a little bit to another time, when Jesus was feeling challenged and showing the real true range of human emotions, he also displays trust as his response. In the Garden of Gethsemane in Matthew 26, when Jesus' resolve is tested, when he's saying, dare I say it, afraid, wanting to find another way besides the crucifixion and being separated from God, he expressed himself honestly, and then he trusts. He prayed, "My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done. Your will be done. I trust you." Thirdly, Psalm 22 reveals what God is like. You know what the Psalms reveal to us? You know what Jesus reveals to us? They reveal what God is like. He is a God who suffers with us, who walks with us, and never abandons us. He is a God who listens. He is a God that welcomes and invites honesty before him. He is a God that is worthy of our trust. And I want to key in on something important and profound that we discover, because Jesus said those words, "Why have you forsaken me?" And it's this: even though we may feel alone in our suffering, We are not alone in our suffering, ever. We're never abandoned, even when it feels like it. That's what's revealed by Jesus' own suffering. That's what God is like. He is with us in our suffering. He didn't promise to remove doubt and fear and loneliness or any of those things, but he did walk through that valley, and he did it so that he could be with us. He's not a God of transcendence, way up there, untouchable, unreachable. No, he knows and journeys with us because he has gone through that too. We are not alone in our suffering because Jesus knows what it means to suffer. Jesus never promised to take it away, but to be with us. And he says, trust me. Trust and faith are what sustain us. Trust in the goodness of God. Trust who he is, what he has done, and what he's going to do. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus has been there. He's uttered that cry. I want to tell you a bit more about Dave. As stories like this often end, he died, despite our prayers and despite our longings. But I was surprised. I thought this whole thing would shake my faith, but strangely enough, it strengthened my faith. I was so sure that I was there for Dave while he was dying, but it seems that he was, in a strange way, there for me. When I asked Dave how he felt about not getting healed, he said he had already been healed and that he was at peace. And the big thing for him was trust. He said trust was more important than certainty. And while he was sick, I happened to be in Vancouver for some meetings and I wanted to reach out to him. And I texted him and I told him about some of my struggles and how I was disappointed about some things. And I shared some of my doubts with him. I didn't know it at the time, but that was my last conversation with Dave. And he sent me a message, a response. And I treasure these words of advice. He said, maybe you need to lighten up a bit. I couldn't believe it, but those words did hit home. There are some questions we can't answer, some things we can't know, some problems we can't solve. And letting go of those things is about grabbing on more firmly to God and trusting him more deeply. Maybe we all need to take ourselves a bit less seriously and trust more in the goodness of God. I know I do. Dave was bang on. God is good. And in those times of doubt, difficulty, and confusion, trust in God's goodness. One of the scriptures Dave was wrestling with shortly before he died was 1 Corinthians 9, verses 12 to 13. And this is what it says. Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. Three things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. No matter how hard life hits us, no matter how many questions we have that we struggle with, no matter what we've been through, we can trust in the goodness of God. These things are guaranteed. We will only know some things. We will feel pain in this life, and we will experience times of turmoil. But despite all that, we can trust in the goodness of God. My God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22 is an invitation to honesty with God, and it encourages and invites us to trust God, and it tells us what God is like. We can trust in his goodness. You feel like you've been abandoned? Be honest with God, trust him, and lean into his character. That is the soil that grows your faith.